Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
This is the Long Island Report on 107.1 WLIR. Using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia.
Good afternoon. This is the Long Island Report. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend and esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, as well as the County Chair of the Suffolk Republican Party. Jesse, good to see you again. How are you?
Good. It's good to actually be here in studio. I'm not out on Long Island, 55 miles away, and at the mercy of technology. So it's great to be here.
Well, you know how I feel about technology. I would be a Luddite. I'd be going into the Industrial Revolution factories and breaking them apart with an axe. Okay, so let's begin.
Sure.
So President Trump announced his candidacy on Tuesday night for a third presidential run. So what I want to get your sense, Jesse, good idea, bad idea? Will this avoid, and I'll raise this issue after, will this avoid a possible indictment of the president? Can he govern? Can he unite the country? So why don't you walk through and tell me how you feel.
Number one, we've seen that he can govern. We've seen in his first term, his policies were always a little bit more popular, actually a lot more popular, a lot more effective than maybe his tweets were. But as I said, I mean, on Tuesday night, Donald Trump showed a stark difference between the policies that America needs and those that the Biden and Pelosi administrations have put forward with disastrous results. In these midterms, we've seen the results of those disastrous policies and that there's a new path that we need to do. We've always talked about that America needs to fill the vacuum of leadership on the global stage and here in America. And the Democrats have not done that. They have seceded that leadership position. So I think it's yet to be determined. I think that we're going to see where the Republican Party goes. But certainly the president was measured. He was articulate. He laid out a series of proposals, term limits, constitutional amendments regarding lobbying and such, restoring a lot of the policies that have been overturned, like energy independence, and we'll get into that a little bit later. But he put forward a lot of the very popular, effective policies that he ran on in 2016 and started implementing effectively until 2020. So I think it's yet to be seen where we go from here.
Well, let me give you my thoughts on
Sure.
this. As I've told you before, I think Donald Trump was an excellent president.
He was.
Overwhelmingly, I agreed with the vast majority of his policies. What I didn't like is what I saw his pettiness and sometimes mean-spiritedness. It was unnecessary. Republican Party is the minority party in the country, so you have to have a broad, big tent the way you run the party here in New York. It's very important. You make friends every day. You don't make enemies every day. It was unnecessary. If he had gotten off the tweet machine, stopped that, just dealt on policy, he would have been elected and reelected overwhelmingly. There would never be a dispute. Now, what are we getting instead? Because of his, as I always say, my mother's favorite expression, his unfortunate personality, he lost reelection, a reelection that he earned on the merits. But for him, we'd still be overwhelmed by the COVID disaster. He's the one who engineered the public-private partnership to get the vaccines going. He doesn't get enough credit for that.
He does not.
He secured our borders. He had a good economy going. We didn't have super crazy inflation. He challenged the progressive movement with their let the criminals out and screw the public. So he was very, very good on so many levels. He understood that you had to stop overtaxation, overregulation. But he had an unfortunate personality, and he's made a lot of enemies. So now people who were part of his cabinet or part of his administration are now taking a hard look, and people had worked with him before at running, notwithstanding his announcement. So, for example, even Vice President Pence, who just released a book, is looking at a possible run. And his book is a good book. Some would argue it's self-serving because he makes himself to be the hero on January 6th. But in many ways, he was a hero. He did the right thing. Okay. Next, you have DeSantis, the governor of Florida. Overwhelming election. You have Youngkin, the governor of Virginia, last year, another overwhelming election. These are very attractive people. Even if they're going to be your competitors in a possible fight for the nomination, don't say petty, mean things, play games with their names. That's nonsense. That's old, it's boring, it's tired. He pulled that stunt in 2016. He has a record to run on. He should concentrate on that. If he concentrates on that, he could do very, very well because he does have a base in the party, I think, of 25 to 27% of the party.
He truly does. And I think that base is because of the record that you just articulated. And let's look at this. I mean, one thing we can't discount, and let's just take New York for a moment, is that, Donald Trump was not going to win New York and the electoral votes in the presidential election in 2020. However, the way the disgraced governor Andrew Cuomo weaponized COVID for election purposes is a scandal in itself. The mail-in ballots, the unchecked mail-in ballots, the manner in which they move forward, the way they unilaterally, with one-party system, overhauled the election calendar multiple times, and they overhauled the election law multiple times under executive orders and such that were later codified. But they weaponized the election law for their purposes, and other states did that as well.
Oh,
and
absolutely.
That's I think you have to say that contributes to Donald Trump's loss and why he feels that the election was stolen.
Okay, but I think you really hit it on the head, and that's very, very interesting because you can separate out election fraud versus integrity of system issues.
Yes.
And integrity of system issues are you shouldn't be able to have months ahead of early voting. Mm-hmm. You shouldn't be able to vote after the election polls are closed with a mail-in ballot. You should, as much as humanly possible, have a regulated system, a normalcy, where you go and you vote on election day. If you want to have a couple of days of early voting right on the eve of the election, that's one thing. If you want to have absentee ballots when a compelling case, it's something else. But just don't have an open-ended system that can be played with. Look what happened in Nevada and Arizona recently. It's terrible. It undermines the trust in the results.
Exactly. Remember, it was COVID and the weaponization of COVID on the election laws on various states that brought us the predominance of these drop boxes where, to use a term of art for yourself in your legal career, there's no chain of custody.
Exactly.
There's no chain of custody for the absentee ballots.
No, it was ridiculous. Yeah. And they were going to nursing homes.
Exactly.
And they were having the caretakers tell the old folks, I guess I'm not too far away from having a caretaker fill out my ballot. But the old folks, this is how you vote. There's no supervision of it.
No supervision.
They mailed them in by the tens of thousands.
Dead people were getting ballots. People who lived out of the community with ballots. Our voter rolls are not cleansed. These are all things. So when I believe that when he talks about election integrity and that the vote was stolen in 2020, what he says about the fraud is one thing. But the gerrymandering, and I'm using that word because we'll get into that later about districts and such in like congressional districts, Senate districts, and assembly districts. But the gerrymandering of the election law and the absentee ballot and the paper ballots is what I believe led to losses on the Republican side right all the way down the ballot.
I agree. Look, the Secretary of State of Georgia entered into a consent decree, totally undermined the law that had been passed by the legislature in Georgia and signed by the governor. That Secretary of State had no legal authority to do that. It was a terrible thing. It was a bad result. Then the Supreme Court of the state of Pennsylvania, they, in a starkly and sharply political decision, overruled on the late ballots, the legislation. It should have been taken by the Supreme Court of the United States. To its shame, the Supreme Court said, let's wait and we'll see. They never should have done that. They should have grabbed that, said they couldn't do it. And that was the difference in Pennsylvania.
Absolutely.
So that undermines the faith of the people in an honest system. So that goes to election integrity. Doesn't mean that people were stuffing ballots, but with the drop boxes, never should have drop boxes.
We should eliminate drop boxes all over the country. It's not right. It's not proper. There's no chain of custody on these issues. And you know what? We want fair and free elections so for everyone. But it's interesting that Republicans talk about that, and we're talking about it in the proper way, in the fact that we want voter ID. But yet the Democrats say we want uncontrolled drop boxes and uncontrolled paper ballots that no one can verify. You need to have voter ID and integrity in our elections to stop these conspiracies.
To get on a plane, you need an ID. To get a library card, you have to have an ID.
To get Advil Cold and Sinus, you need an ID.
It's not a big deal. First of all, the Department of Motor Vehicles can give, even if you're not a driver, it can give you a statewide ID.
Absolutely.
It's not a big deal.
And you can go to your local board of elections and get the same thing.
Yeah. And there's no reason that we shouldn't have that. And it's not. And what you're going to say that minorities are less likely to have a driver's license or an ID? It's ridiculous.
Why?
That in itself is racist.
Exactly. And why? Now we can give licenses to undocumented aliens anyway. So there is no racial component to this. You know what it is? When Democrats get challenged, they immediately go to the race card.
And I tell you, as a House Democrat, I find it very, very offensive. I'm for voter integrity. Without voter integrity, you have no confidence in the system. Without confidence in the system, you can't unite and govern this country. It's not too difficult. So let me raise this issue with you. There was a great column by Andy McCarthy in the National Review recently, and he said that if Trump doesn't run, then it gives a green light to the Justice Department to indict him for whatever they choose to indict him for. Now, I like Andy McCarthy a lot. He's a very smart guy. He's a great federal prosecutor. I understand the analysis, but I think that they're absolutely...
That's Andy McCarthy calling you right now.
I think they're absolutely out of their minds if the Justice Department thinks that going after Donald Trump, a past president of the United States, who's now a candidate for the presidency, that they think that won't be one of the most divisive events that would take place in this country's history. How dare they even think about it?
I agree with you, but are you not surprised? I think the fact that he did announce that he's running for president is going to garner indictments on the federal level and the state level. I think that we're going to get an indictment out of New York's district attorney's office, or Manhattan's district attorney's office, the AG's office. I think we're going to get it out of the Department of Justice. This is the same Department of Justice that, ironically, Biden and company criticized the president President Trump for politicizing back in the day, and he had an attorney general that was beyond reproach. Barr was beyond reproach.
And you know the irony, and I've met Bill Barr.
Bill Barr.
And I've had lunch with the attorney general. And I have to tell you something. I have to tell you something about Bill Barr. Donald Trump has no idea how lucky he was to have Bill Barr as his attorney general. He's smart. He has integrity. He called it the way he saw it, and he was protecting Trump against Trump's own lack of knowledge of the legal system. Exactly. And Trump didn't understand it or appreciate it.
So I think that I believe that Bill Barr prevented politics from being used in the Department of Justice, where here we have Biden and we have a Department of Justice that goes in and undertakes a raid of a former president's home, unannounced, without consultation of counsel, and embarrasses him. If they did that to his home to Mar-a-Lago, you don't think they're going to indict him? Absolutely they're going to indict him. They want divisiveness. Well, they don't want this country united.
Well, you know, it's very interesting. And you and I, as we walked into the studio just now, we saw Mayor Rudolph Giuliani. And I have to, in full disclosure, I have to say my first appointment to the bench, the criminal court, was by Rudy Giuliani. Mm-hmm. I was reappointed to the criminal court bench by Bloomberg and put on the New York Supreme Court by Judges Kay and Lippman, the chief judges of the state. But Rudy appointed me to the first judgeship I had. But I fought, as you heard when Rudy and I were talking, we mixed up pretty good because he was the mayor and I was the general counsel, city council, and we had different views on different things. And we litigated against each other other times, but always with respect and affection.
But that's the thing. The bench, like the Departments of Justice, and I know we're going up a hard break, they should be there for fairness, transparency, integrity, and fairness.
Absolutely.
That's what judges need to be, whether you're Republican, Democrats, conservatives. That's what we do. And I think we do that fair. We do that. We look for the best legal minds, and we put them on the bench in Suffolk County. That's another guy wanting to be a judge of one of the clients.
You, it's just amazing how the phone. If I get in, I can turn it off. So the short answer is this: Rudy Giuliani. They made a big sweep of his offices, a big sweep of his apartment, and they just announced yesterday there's going to be no action. But they had to humiliate Rudy Giuliani, who is America's mayor, and this city and this state and this country were lucky to have Rudy because he was there fighting to protect this city against that evil attack by those extremists who went into the trade centers.
But you know what? It's also interesting. But that happens to the Rudy Giuliani's of the world. That happens to the Donald Trumps of the world now. But every day that happens to John Q. Citizen.
Of
I
course.
mean, you
course.
have raids on small businesses. We have subpoenas on small business. You know, the worst thing you can do is fight the IRS or the Department of Taxation in the state of New York.
Yeah,
You're never going to come out a winner on
you
that.
can't win. That's why
can't.
people fold.
Exactly.
That's why General Flynn folded.
Exactly.
Because they were about to indict his son, and it was costing him a fortune in legal fees. So he pled out to some nonsense charge, which he wasn't guilty of, just to get off the hook.
Absolutely.
All right, Kevin is now giving us that hard look for at least the third time. Let the record reflect. We will be taking a short break. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We'll be right back for the second segment of the Long Island Report.
My cat Freddie loves to be brushed and cuddled. But stirring up his cat allergens meant sneezing and itchy eyes. Then I found Purina One Live Clear. It's cat food that reduced the major allergen and my suffering in as little as 21 days. Now, we feel closer than ever. If you have issues with cat allergens, you really need to try Purina One Live Clear.
Try new Purina One Live Clear today. Purina One, a difference from day one.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
All right, this is the Long Island Report. We're back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. So the next question is, and I need you to put on your political wisdom hat on this one.
Let me phone a friend then.
Phone a friend. What do they have, that TV show? You remember you had 3 calls you could make?
Want to be a millionaire and all that stuff?
Some show. Kevin, you remember the name of that show? And you could call in, right?
Yes.
Okay. Anyway, so you can call whoever you want, but I don't think you need anybody. How could the Democrats do so well and the Republicans do so poorly in these midterms, Jesse?
That's interesting because from my corner of the world, out on Long Island, Suffolk County, Long Island, we did outstanding. Throughout the state of New York, we did outstanding.
I agree.
And
Florida. Florida.
So a lot of those transplanted New Yorkers that are fleeing New York right now. But what happened is New York, and I have to give credit, and we spoke about this last week, Lee Zeldin, our gubernatorial candidate, who amassed more votes than any Republican gubernatorial candidate in the last 50 years, I think since Rockefeller, even more than Pataki, and Pataki won 3 times. He had deep, long coattails that now we have 11 members of the House of Representatives. It's because of Lee Zeldin and the seats that we won in New York that the Republicans are going to capture the House for the next term as the majority. It's because of New York. Imagine that. Because of New York, blue New York, and that's a direct result of Lee Zeldin. We also flipped about 13 assembly seats. We flipped a host of Senate seats. We won locally. So it was a good night here in New York. Across the nation, I don't know. And I think that part of this, and we were discussing it, I was discussing with a number of different individuals. I believe that part of it is maybe party infrastructure in some areas. We need to build out the party in different perspectives. I also think that some of the infighting that occurred at the national level, whether it be the Senate Republican Committee or the National Republican Campaign Committee for the congressional offices, where perhaps we should have given more resources in different areas, or we were slow to give resources in several states or districts for Senate races. I think that was problematic. I also think that we should have had more resources. Like I believe that Herschel Walker in Georgia and the governor should have run almost within a point of each other, which would have taken them out of this, taken Herschel Walker out of the runoff. And I think Herschel Walker.
But you had 2 other minority candidates too.
That's
minority
true.
party candidates, which took votes away.
Exactly, and that was planned. Right. But I think that with the resources there, they should have run closer together, and we would have already had that seat. I think that we need to stop apportioning resources based on who's my friend, who's going to be loyal to me, and base those resources and funding to the cause of capturing Republican seats.
Absolutely,
I think
correct.
we missed the boat nationally on that issue, and I think it's because too many people were playing the politics of personality and personal loyalty than they were of winning seats to grow larger majorities.
Well, as you know, I meet on a regular basis, as does John Catsimatidis, with candidates, whether the local candidates, whether the congressional candidates, governors, candidates, AG, secretaries of state, United States Senate. And this is my take as a Democrat. And as a Democrat, I'm against, as you know, having all the government apparatus controlled by one party.
Absolutely.
White House, House, Senate. I think it was very, very important because I think the Trump policies were good, and I think the Biden policies are terrible for our country and are a threat to our national security and to our economy and the future of this country. So I wanted to see divided government. Let the Congress, both houses, be in the hands of the Republicans. Let the White House stay with Biden for the next couple of years, and then slow the push towards craziness down a bit. So this is what I think was the problem. There was a rivalry between Senator Scott of Florida and Senator McConnell. Mm-hmm. And so they had that split. Then you had Trump, who had his own candidates. Okay. Now, to their credit, for the most part, McConnell and Scott did work together as a voice of the Senate leadership. Okay. Trump pushed a lot of people that he shouldn't have been pushing. And there were seats that were lost that they should have been won. The best example, to my mind, is New Hampshire, where the incumbent Senator Maggie Hassan easily was vulnerable. She would have been taken out if you had the leader of the state Senate in New Hampshire as a candidate rather than the general. General was probably a lovely guy, a great patriot, but was a terrible candidate. And that was a problem. So that was a seat they just gave up. Okay? There are other examples of that, too. I've met Dr. Oz. I've had lunch with Dr. Oz. I think he's a very impressive guy. I think he'd been a great senator.
He also grew
Absolutely.
as the campaign went along.
Right.
Because he's not a politician.
But he's a remarkably talented guy and a very good person, very charitable. He would have been a very common sense, level-headed United States senator. So who do they get in their stead? They got this guy who's the victim of a stroke, doesn't know what's going on, is a total tool of the political apparatus of the Democratic Party, how anybody in their right minds could vote for him. And even if he didn't have the stroke and he wasn't raising issues of his intellectual or mental capacity, he was a crazy left-winger. He wanted to open up all the jails in Pennsylvania. He wanted to end fracking. He wanted to get rid of coal. He's a tax and spend lefty. So how people in Pennsylvania could elect a guy like that to the United States Senate is remarkable. And the person who could have won that seat was a guy named McCormick, who's a businessman. And what did they do? McCormick was opposed by Trump. Trump's guy was Oz. They spent a lot of money, a lot of time and effort. They diverted a lot of their attention. So by the time they came into the fall, after a hotly fought primary, there was financial and physical exhaustion on the part of Republicans. That was a seat that could have been won.
It could have been won. We certainly saw it in the beginning. And I think McCormick and Dr. Oz proved that it could have been won. I think the problem was that there was a lack of resources. I think for the most part, he funded his campaign himself and through fundraising. But, where was the Senate Republican Committee? And if the Senate Republican wasn't going to be there for one reason or another, maybe they had other races they thought that we could do it better. Well, where was the Trump super PAC to make sure to fill in that void of leadership?
Well, where was Trump? Where was Trump in the Arizona race with Blake Masters?
I believe he should have been everywhere.
He should have, but Blake Masters could have been a better candidate.
Absolutely.
But I've met Blake Masters, and I'll tell you, he's a solid, smart guy. Mm-hmm. I call him a kid because he's much younger than I am, but he's a very smart guy, and he could have been an effective candidate, an effective senator. Peter Thiel, the billionaire who pushed his candidacy, totally disappeared from the screen after getting the nomination. And so they weren't supporting him.
And I think that's where we needed another entity, whether it be Trump, super PAC, or whether it be the Senate committee, to come in earlier than they did, if at all. And I don't think they did. But here's the other thing. Let's go back to Fetterman. Great manipulation by the Democratic establishment. I mean, you got to give them credit. About 1 million votes were cast either by paper or by early voting by the time that debate took place.
Exactly right.
And I bet you anything. Now, imagine if that debate took place a week earlier. It would be Dr. Oz would be the senator right now.
I agree. Absolutely.
There was a turning point in the race. We spoke about this, that Lee Zeldin the same night took apart and made his closing argument against Kathy Hochul that night. Only because Fetterman failed the way he did and Dr. Oz shined the way he did, that they knocked Lee
little,
Zeldin.
too late.
Lee Zeldin off the national stage,
That's right.
and it was too little, too late in their own race.
Look, I mean, the Biden strategy of hiding in the basement
Absolutely works, I guess.
It worked for Hochul, it worked for Fetterman, and it worked for the governor-elect of Arizona,
Absolutely.
who disappeared, who refused to have any debates.
Any debates
at all.
I don't understand how a resident, a voter, would go into the voting booth with their candidate of choice scared to face off. If they're scared to face off against their political challenger in a race, what about when a true crisis comes, or when they need to fight for the people of Arizona in this case against other forces, whether it be border issues or whether it be for rights of Arizonans against other states? They're going to hide in the closet, and we have no proven fighter for our citizens in Arizona because they hide in the closet.
No, absolutely correct. Now, let me raise this question. To you. What's next for the Republican leadership in the Senate and House? What we do know right now is that there was a battle for the leadership of the Senate, and Senator McConnell beat Senator Scott.
Yes.
Okay. So,
which is more of a token because I think Scott got in late.
Yeah, and I don't know why. Again, I know both McConnell and Scott. I don't know why Senator Scott did that, but he did it. He lost. McConnell will be the leader, whether it's the majority leader or the minority leader. It looks like it's the minority leader right now. He will be the leader of the Republicans in the United States Senate. Okay, we know that. Now, in the House, Kevin McCarthy secured the support overwhelmingly in the House to be the next speaker. He's their candidate to be the speaker. Now, the problem is you have this group called the Freedom Caucus, and there's somewhere between, I guess, 30 to 40 Republicans who are more hard right than McCarthy, who's more of a centrist, a conservative, but more centrist. And some of them are saying they're going to withhold the votes. Now, let me get this straight. Let me educate these people in the House. Number one, you need a majority of the full complement of the United States House of Representatives. So if they withhold their votes from McCarthy, what are you going to do? Elect a Democratic speaker? That could happen.
I don't believe that's going to happen.
No, I don't think it's going to happen either. But how can you play that game? How can you shake down McCarthy? They should be rallying behind McCarthy as the face and the voice of the Republican Party in the House. Yeah.
Let's just take the Senate first. Senator McConnell, as we just discussed, and maybe we'll go into it, there were campaign mistakes that he made, whether it be statements criticizing our candidates early
quality
on,
candidates,
the quality of our candidates, whether it be the directing the resources at all or too little, too late in certain races. So I think you can question his leadership about that. The one thing, though, and maybe he's still trading on this, the fact that he kept open as the majority leader of the Senate during the last Obama year, that's Supreme Court seat, for me, still is important because it allowed President Trump to add to the Supreme Court to now the majority we have. And the way,
Absolutely
even in
correct.
2020, I believe that there was a discussion somewhere in the room. I have no idea if it did, but I would imagine there was. There was 3 months left in the year, and they decided, is the election worth us making sure that we secure the court for the next 25 years? And I believe that the decision was made. We had to secure the court. And that's why we appointed a new justice during an election year in 2020. And so I think he's still, he's still benefiting from that type of leadership. But I think now as more and more people across the country, certainly here in New York, and even in more conservative states, are looking at him and saying, what are we going on here? As for McCarthy, this is an opportunity to take the gavel, to take chairmanships, to have subpoena powers, to block the Biden agenda. We need to wake up and make sure that this happens. Now, it's funny because you had a group of individuals like Jim Jordan and Marjorie Greene who voted for McCarthy, yet about 31 members of the Freedom Caucus didn't. So I'm just hoping that throughout the course of the next several weeks that the senses come and we have a unified, whether it's Congressman McCarthy or whether it's another member, that we're unified behind one leader so that we don't have chaos on the first day of what should be a Republican
I want to give one more thought because Kevin has given us that sign again, but I just want our audience to know that you and I had the privilege and pleasure at a Southampton breakfast to meet with Congressman McCarthy.
Yes, we did.
And the man is a student of history. He's a student of government. He's common sense. He's moderate. He's centrist. He's both by ideology and temperament. He's going to be a great leader of the United States House of Representatives. He's the right man at the right time in history. And I think we're lucky to have at least one House being led by someone like that. All right, let's take the break. This is the Long Island Report. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We'll be coming back in a moment with our third segment of this week's Long Island Report.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. We're back. This is Judge Richard Weinberg. With me is my good friend, esteemed colleague, Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Jesse is the Vice Chair of the State Republican Party, as well as being the County Chair of the Suffolk County Republican Party. Well, Jesse, let's begin with this question. Do people know when they go in to vote on Election Day that there are even propositions or proposals on the ballot? And if they do know that, they know anything about what these proposals or propositions stand for, or they're just taking a guess, yes or no, or maybe? What do you think about that?
I think that they don't know what the propositions are unless there's some media or some outreach for it. In Suffolk County, we did have outreach. We closed the Democratic loophole for term limits on county executive and county legislature and other county offices. That vote was won by 86% of the vote. The state ballot was successful, but it was not. Typically, if you don't know somebody's on the ballot, you vote no because it's going to cost you more. And in the case of this proposition with the state bond act, it's going to cost us more.
Of course.
It's going to drive us further away from energy independence. And all it is, as you pointed out in the break, a slush fund for someone's pet project like the Green New Deal. It's not going to work.
It's in nobody's interest. I have to tell you, and I use the word progressive in the traditional sense, not the way it's being used now, the so-called progressive movement of Hiram Johnson of California and the La Follette family in Wisconsin and Washington State and Oregon, those are all progressive states where you can put everything on the ballot. Mm-hmm. And the voters will do that, and that will then become legislation. Now, it sounds good, but the problem is it's always the big money guys who run what the proposition is, how it's marketed,
absolutely,
and what kind of agenda they have to get their thing through. And therefore, if you don't have an educated electorate the way Jefferson said you have to have, you're going to get stuff through which is really dumb stuff. This first ballot proposition, and I speak as somebody who votes in New York City, first one was this bond act for green energy. Well, it's a slush fund. They want to stop any possibility of fracking. They want to stop any idea of fossil fuels being used. They want to close down everything. They want everything to be electrified. Well, as we've talked about in this show several times, the technology is not there. The infrastructure is not there. The safety issues are not there. We're decades away from being able to abandon fossil fuel. If we want air conditioning in the summer, we want heat in the winter, if we want cars that are safe, if we want hospitals that can run, not have their computers go down, if you want businesses to run, if you want the banking industry and the Wall Street to work, you can't rely just on electric, because electric, by the way, in large measures is triggered by fossil fuels.
I just don't understand any official in the state of New York that is concerned about our economy, concerned about our quality of life, concerned about the middle class. How about just the middle class? Would want to ban and stop fracking. It's a natural resource when it's done properly, safely. It is a natural resource that creates jobs and allows this state to be energy independent in its own right, and also allows for those type of energy costs to go down. And if you want to talk about diversity, it gives us a diversification of different energy resources.
Which makes common sense.
It is common sense to do that. And we've always said, what drives electricity? Fossil fuels in the fossil fuels and those big turbines. That's what it does. So it's a misnomer.
You can't rely on solar and you can't rely on wind. It's just not going to happen. So the other three propositions in New York, which are going to have enormous impact, because since they passed in New York, don't be surprised if somebody gets the bright idea to put them on as propositions, as statewide propositions next time. And as you correctly pointed, at least historically, if you didn't know what was on the ballot, you voted no. But now the recent wave has been, even if you don't know what's on the ballot and you don't understand it, they've been voting yes. So what were these propositions? Saying about a commission for racial justice and make it part of the city charter. What is this? And all kinds of racial identification in terms of programming. So what is this going to lead to? More division by race, which
Absolutely.
we don't need. And this is a setup, an absolute setup. They can deny it all they want, but it's perfectly clear they're going to do disparity of income, and they're going to say, oh, we have to have reparations, or we have to give more funding to favored groups for the social programs. This is a bad idea at the wrong time. And let me point this out to you. New York City and New York State is going to run out of federal money.
It is.
I mean, you can see it in this new budget in New York coming up in the new year, and you're going to see it in the state. They think they're awash in cash. They're not. They don't have sufficient reserves. This is very, very dangerous. Then what do? You're going to tax. You keep taxing and spending. And how do people vote, Jesse? They vote with their feet.
You're absolutely right. Listen, I think that progressives in New York City, what they want to do is lay out a plan to divide people, because when the people are divided, that's when, they become more important. And we need to govern, and we need to act legislatively for the purposes of unity. If you're gonna say Donald Trump is a divider and Republicans are dividers, what you've done right here is a function to divide the city.
Absolutely, Democrats are just as good or worse on this division.
And what you're going to do is you are actually chasing away and attacking the middle class that's going to suffer from these commissions and such, and you're driving them away. What you're doing is you're driving away your tax base, and that's what we've seen here. We've got we have seen an increase in the population of Florida. That's almost like New York City Democrats, New York Democrats, and are like the real estate agent for DeSantis in Florida. Yet they're running away from these policies and becoming Republicans down in Florida. That's why Republicans outnumber Democrats now for the first time in history down in Florida. So, I mean, it's happening that way.
So you know what that means? It means blue states were going to become bluer.
That's true, because more and more of the middle class is going to run out, and what we're going to have is more disparity. You're going to have the elites and those that are going to be right there on the poverty line. There's not going to be anything in between. And I think that's what Democrats are trying to do. And of course, they're going to find themselves on the side of the on the side of the elites.
Well, let's switch gears.
Sure.
Let's talk about, there's all kinds of blame game going on about, whose fault it was. We've talked about the Nationals, but now you have a blame game going on in New York State, in New York City, for what happened with the winning of the 11 House seats and those 13 seats you talked about in the State Assembly, as well as a whole cluster of the State Senate, which stops the Democratic supermajority in the State Senate. And now they're trying to pick on Mayor Eric Adams. And all Adams did was speak the truth. And now the other person they're trying to blame, another person who spoke the truth, and both of them spoke the truth about crime, was Jay Jacobs, your colleague and friend, who's the chairman of the state party and was the county chairman.
He still is the county chairman
of Nassau. And blaming him, he was the canary in the coal mines. He was telling you exactly that they were doing the wrong thing.
The people who want to start blaming and pointing fingers should first look in the mirror, and that's the leadership of the State Assembly. That's the leadership of the State Senate. Those individuals and the caucus leaders that they led have led New York to policies that are being rejected wholeheartedly by the people of the state. They're not just being rejected by Republicans. They're not just being rejected by the unaffiliated voters. They're being rejected by Democrats, and that's where the blame game should happen. And listen, it's always easy to blame the leader. The leader's got to keep everything in play and moving forward. And like a head coach in football, a manager in baseball, the first day you get hired, you know that one day is going to happen. You're going to get fired. But to take this blame, is wrong, because it was these far left legislators who the leader of the Democratic Party called out and said, "You're leading us down the wrong path," and warned, is what's led to these dynamic
and
losses.
they're blaming him.
Exactly.
And they're saying Eric Adams shouldn't have talked about crime. No, you're supposed to let the bodies pile up here
exactly.
and do nothing.
Well,
and it's okay.
I'm sorry. I didn't know that my oath of office, if I'm Eric Adams, was suspended for 30 days before election. I thought that I'm still supposed to, speak the truth and defend our citizenry. That's ludicrous. So you want this guy to be quiet. I mean, no, Mayor Adams, whatever philosophical differences we may have, he was right to sound the alarm on crime, and that he needed and should have gotten a special session of the legislature to get it changed. And we're never going to have that.
Well, let me ask you this question, and we've gotten a sign from Kevin. We have a few minutes left in this segment, but I want to ask you this. Do you believe that Kathy Hochul, who's just been elected for the first time as governor, and the leaders of the state legislature, that is Hasty and Stuart Cousins, are they going to ever understand and grasp the depth and the breadth of the crime wave in New York State? And will these people do what's necessary to save New York City, New York State, and the suburbs?
I don't think so. Because they live in a bubble. Kathy Hochul didn't, talks a lot about cashless bail, did nothing about cashless bail. Let's see what happens in her budget, or maybe what she takes a page out of Lee Zeldin's book and declares a crime emergency and suspends some of these laws, and maybe go after a district attorney or two that don't uphold their oath of office and, prosecute criminals. Let's see if she does that. But I don't think it happens, because why? She's got a security detail. Lee Zeldin was out there campaigning in all 62 counties. He was attacked once, and there was a shooting outside his house. He had no security. But Kathy Hochul lives in a bubble of security, and so do these leaders of the state assembly and the state senate. Crime doesn't affect them because they have armed guards, and they want to take guns away from law-abiding citizens.
I know, it's terrible. And I have to tell you this. What I'm deeply troubled about is that they keep saying they want to see the statistics. What more do you need? Just read the daily reports. Just look at the reports from Comstat. Crime is up in New York City and New York State. There is no safe place. Out in Riverhead, in the shopping center in front of the Target, and during broad daylight, a guy pulls up next to another car, pulls a gun on him, and robs him in broad daylight at the Target in Riverhead.
Yes.
And the victim actually followed him in the car, got his license plate, and they made an arrest. Mm-hmm. But he could just as well blown the victim's head off.
Absolutely.
I mean, so nobody's safe nowhere. So if you live in the suburbs, you're not safe. You live upstate, you're not safe. Look what happened in Buffalo recently. No one is safe anywhere as long as you have leaders who will not recognize that there's a crime epidemic and you have to protect the public, and that's the obligation to do so.
And that's because criminals know that there are no consequences. They know that the people in power that have the control levels of authority here in the state of New York, these progressive Democrats under one-party rule, that they have degenerated. I can't say the word. I'm sorry, but they've attacked our police. They've dispirited our police, and now they've created laws where cops and judges, their hands are locked up in handcuffs, and the criminals know they're going to go free. They're going to be in and out within an hour.
Okay, and I told when we came into the studio, remember we were talking to Mayor Giuliani,
yes. Mm-hmm.
And I said to him that Eric Adams, who ran on a law and order platform, and was going to appoint strong, tough judges, there were 5 judges who weren't reappointed. I know 2 of them very well because they started with me way back when in 2001. Okay, and 2 superb judges, very public safety oriented, knew their business, and I don't know what this mayor's commission on judicial appointments did, but they sabotaged these 2 judges. I don't know about the other 3 that weren't appointed, but these 2 judges, who I know very well, had absolute confidence in they would do the right thing to understand the obligation of judges to enforce the law and not to be bleeding hearts to let every criminal out. They've now been denied reappointment, and I'm very unhappy about that. And if I see Eric Adams, and I like Eric on a personal level, I will tell him, you better take a hard look at the members of your Judicial Appointments Commission because you lost two great judges. Let's take the break. Mm-hmm. We'll be back in a moment for the final segment of the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. Thank you.
This episode is brought to you by Loom by Atlassian. Are you feeling stuck at work? Get your team unstuck with Loom video messaging and move work forward. Use Loom to simultaneously record both your screen and yourself to share a quick update, provide feedback, train a colleague, and everything in between. Plus, add Loom AI to your meetings for instant written notes and recordings. Try Loom today at Loom.com. That's LOOM.com.
It's the Long Island Report, using common sense, talking Long Island issues. Now, here are your hosts, Judge Richard Weinberg and Suffolk County Republican Committee Chairman Jesse Garcia on 107.1 WLIR.
This is the Long Island Report. This is Judge Richard Weinberg with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. We're back for our final segment of this week's Long Island Report. So, Jesse, the border surge continues. They blew out 2 officials in Homeland Security and Border Control. They did that. To me, it's a political gambit. The border's still open. They're doing nothing. The guy they should blow out is the Homeland Secretary, because he's done nothing to protect the border. This week, again, he testified that the border is getting more and more secure. What do you say about that?
I mean, all you have to do is see what the stats coming over. I mean, just now we were talking about rainbow fentanyl coming across the border and coming and whatnot. The border is not secure. It's not secure at all. You can do all the talk you want, but it's not happening. You can get the mainstream media to back you up on it. And, it's just a fallacy. Unless you put the resources there like Donald Trump did and put the policies up in place and start putting up that wall and fixing those issues and making sure that we close these loopholes, it's going to continue to go forward. There is no southern border. The President Trump was right when he said the southern border has been erased. It doesn't exist anymore. You can just move forward freely back and forth. And what it is truly doing, it's creating an economic crisis in our cities, and it's causing a public safety crisis in our communities, all our communities, and it's really going after the human element, because in the human element I describe cartels and fentanyl coming across the borders without impunity, and you have this human trafficking that's going on, and that's really the unspoken truths that are going on here. People are turning their eye away and their gaze away from their attention away from the human trafficking that continues to go through, and it's fostered and fueled through the southern border. That really does not exist anymore.
This week on Cats at Night, we had 2 very interesting interviews. One was with General Jack Keane, former Deputy Chief of the Army, Chief of Staff of the Army, and the other was Gordon Chang, who's the leading expert on China and the threat of China. And both of them agreed that we haven't woken up yet to the threat of China. It's not a coincidence that we're being flooded by fentanyl. The ingredients are coming from China. None of these ingredients could come if the Chinese Communist Party did not give them the green light to come through. They could shut it down. They're a totalitarian regime. If they want to stop the flood of drugs, absolutely, it's much easier to stop the flood of drugs when you have the guns and the bayonets than when you have a democratic system, as we do. And so they're deliberately sending the stuff over. So in my opinion, this is in very real sense, this is an active war and an active attrition by the Chinese against us. The weakness from the inside so they can take us out from the outside. And General Keane was very, very clear that we are not up. We have a great Army, we have a great Navy, we have a great Air Force, but we're not up, as the Heritage Foundation has said in a recent report, we're not up to fighting 2 wars at the same time, and we're really at risk of not being able to fight 1 war at a time, and which means that there's one place that's really vulnerable now to domination by China, which will undermine. You want to talk about the integrity of the grid system and having energy. If you don't have chips, exactly, you can't do electric. And if you're giving up fossil fuel and you can't do electric, what do you got? You have the end of civilization. And who controls 90% of chips, Jesse?
China.
Right. And who controls all the raw materials for batteries? China. So, I mean, isn't it time we woke up and realized that we're under siege?
I wish we did, but I don't know if we can wake up the president, and we're not going to wake him up anytime soon, because anybody who does not think that China is waging a multi-level war against the United States, is just burying their head in the sand. Yeah, as you said, we're talking about fentanyl, going after our society, going after that issue. We're talking about economics, going after withholding a number of different resources and whatnot. We're not independent on our energy. We're not independent on our manufacturing. We saw that during COVID, where we were not independent in getting our antibiotics.
Right. But that's very well said. They control the ingredients for the pharmaceuticals.
Exactly. So we have to start doing now. What's even worse than that is that they're waging a cyber war against us. We knew that was been going on. They've been trying to influence our grid, our elections, our economic and our financial communities and such.
How about academia?
Academia as well, and social media. And what now? The Biden administration is just sitting back and not allowing and just letting China's and Chinese state-run companies buy up swaths of land in the Midwest.
Right near military bases.
Right near military bases. It is number one, is right near military bases. And the other thing is these are farming communities that actually feed us. And they're going to be controlling that. You know what? We have our head in our sand with this leadership of the right now in the United States has its head in the sand. It has so many problems coming at it. It is self-inflicted, many of these. And what we're doing is we're not coming forward with any solutions. This is where you miss, as an American, you miss that tough guy approach. That tough guy approach that Donald Trump portrayed. That tough approach that George W. Bush portrayed and moved forward, and then had to moderate a bit as we came out of our towers were still burning in 9/11. We need a tough approach to our enemies, and we need to allow our allies to understand that we are there for them. Our demonstration, whether it be Afghanistan, Ukraine, NATO, the EU, America is not a partner in this. America wants to take a step back under the Biden administration. It's not leading. It's allowing others to lead, and someone else is going to fill that vacuum.
Well, and when we were talking to Gordon Chang the other night, I raised the issue with him. I said, look, and I said this to General Kane as well, look, what's really going on here is they're playing the long game.
Yes, they are.
And Biden thinks it's great. He gets his photo op, and he says, we're going to continue talking. Well, we're talking. They're moving.
Exactly. They're mobilizing. They're acting.
All their resources, everything they have, they're creating false islands, and they're putting military in there. They're buying up land in the United States. They're buying up land in Venezuela. You remember the Monroe Doctrine.
Absolutely.
You remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. They're going to be within heartbeats away from us in the South American region. I mean, what are we doing? And he thinks talking is not an end in itself. No. Talking is a device to get you to where you need to be. And the only way to have talk is when you talk from a position of strength. Ronald Reagan had exactly right.
Absolutely. You know what? And when you look at Ronald Reagan, you look at Donald Trump, they were blunt instruments when it came to national security. It was this way. It was the American way. Whether you want to call it the America First policy that Donald Trump had it, or the policy to restore America to greatness that President Reagan was putting forward. You need to demonstrate that you are willing to fight for what you believe in and fight and keep the liberties and freedoms we have. We're not doing that. We are basically creating a vacuum abroad and in within our own country.
Well, that's a very good segue to the final topic, because we just got the sign from Kevin. We just have a few minutes. The Iran deal. So I think I told you last week that I had the privilege and pleasure of having lunch with Senator Kane of Virginia, who was the vice presidential candidate with Hillary Clinton back in 2016. And I raised the Iran deal with him. And he said to me, it's not going to happen. Well, I hope he's right. But let's look at what the Iran deal did. It gave tens of billions, hundreds of billions of dollars of money to the Iranians. They use it for terror operation. They're selling or giving the drones to Russia in their aggressive, adventurous war against an independent nation, Ukraine. They subvert anybody against them. They're killing their own citizens in the streets. They're now trying through kangaroo courts any protesters, and they're going to be hanging them shortly. So what is the Biden administration doing to rallying support for the civil disobedience and the attempt to restore a secular common sense regime in Iran? They're doing nothing.
No.
And they killed keep, and John Kerry is the worst of this because he has this obsession with the Green New Deal. And he said the most important thing about the Ukrainian war was it might impede his attempt to get climate legislation through and climate deals. I mean, what is wrong with that man? And this guy ran for president of the United States?
It's unbelievable. And, one thing I say to Senator Keene, I hope that what he says to you privately, that he says on the Senate floor, I hope that he extends a hand to any Republican, Democrat senator, independent senator, and that says, let's stop this Iran deal from happening. Let's not just leave it up to chance that it not happen. Let's take affirmative steps to make sure it doesn't. And here's the other thing. I mean, we need, to your other point, it just does not work. And we've seen what Iran has been doing. It has been utilizing the monies that we released on an ill-fated deal, approved by Obama and Biden, and they are
without
a treaty, without consent of the Congress, and now those resources, those funds, the cash is now being used in proxy wars against U.S. allies, U.S. forces directly, and any freedom-loving democracy that's in the Middle East or anywhere across the world.
Absolutely correct. Well, Kevin has given us the ultimate sign for this week. This has been the Long Island Report with Chairman Jesse Garcia of the Republican Party. I'm Judge Richard Weinberg. I hope you've enjoyed this conversation as much as Jesse and I have enjoyed having it.
It's great being in here. I got to make it in here more often.
Good. Love to have you here. Thanks again.
Thank you.